A man born May 29th, 1955 in Kenya. He ends up getting raised in England. He completes his undergraduate studies at the University of York, and then he receives a scholarship at the University of Victoria. So he travels all the way to Canada, where he completes some postgraduate education, and then he tops it all off with a PhD at the Simon Fraser University. After that's all done, ditches his life in Canada, he moves to Massachusetts. He becomes a professor of communication at the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. He then dedicates his life to the study of ideology, consumption, and the politics of media. He looks at how and why it's created, and how it's consumed, and the perceptions created after that media is consumed. He wants to know the role of media as a means to control population. He gets voted best professor. He writes 2 books. He founds the Media Education Foundation, therefore becoming the executive director of it, and writes 2 more books. So today we will be looking into one of Sut Jhally's wonderful statements. You might be thinking, oh, is that a quote? Yes, it's a quote. And then we'll be either accepting it, negotiating, or rejecting it. And we're gonna negotiate it. So here it goes. Media images turn real and complex human beings into crude, one-dimensional caricatures, which then come to define minority populations for the majority. I will be choosing the middle option we have here, which is negotiation, and I'll be doing sort of a negotiation through addition. Basically, he has this idea, right, but I'm going to be adding to it a little bit. Sut is completely right. Media does do this and defines minorities for majorities and consequently changes the perception of minority groups by the majority groups in the real-life scenarios that they're presented in. But we can't forget that it also has negative impacts to the minority population perceptions. And that's what I'm doing here today, is adding to it. Now hear me out. While it does happen that the majorities have a new perception of the minorities, we can't forget that the minorities are also getting a changed perception of themselves. And there's actually a study done that proves both Sut's points and my additional point. A small roster of studies examines the relationship between mass media depictions of racial/ethnic groups and their subsequent impact on social perceptions. The findings indicate that televised portrayals of racial/ethnic minorities influence majority group members' real-world perceptions about the minority groups, as well as minority group members' evaluations of self, conducted by these people. Oftentimes, the minorities are poorly represented and have their perceptions altered of themselves. So, Sut Jhally usually likes to look into media's effects on 3 main groups: race, gender, and class. So I thought, since the man himself does it, I should do it too. So I'll be examining his clause and my additional clause through these 3 main aspects. And of course, adding my own explanation to all 3 as well. Number 1, race. So the first example I'm going to present is race, and I'm going to be using the misrepresentation of Native Americans in media. Roll the clip.
You didn't tell me he was your chief.
Long Elk is my father and chief of our people.
Now, this has created sort of the effect that when people say Native American, the greater population usually thinks of this: people wearing war paint, headdresses, and who go hunting with bow and arrows. So, good job, Sut. You've analyzed it completely correctly. This is a character of one dimension, just this, and oftentimes is how the minority is perceived. Now, my bit comes in. It's also affected the Native American perceptions of themselves as well. From a journal article named Frozen in Time, the Impact of Native American Media Representations on Identity and Self-Understanding, by these whole bunch of people, they write that The lack of contemporary representation of Native Americans in the media limits the ways in which Native Americans understand what is possible for themselves and how they see themselves fitting into contemporary domains, such as education and employment, of social life. Basically, they see this type of representation over and over and over and over and over again, and they start believing that this is their place. They don't really belong in the greater society, and they'll just sort of interact with the white people if they need their help. Overall, they're supposed to be Native Americans, and they'll just remain that way, which is false. Number 2, gender. So, gay and lesbian representation in the media has increased significantly since the early 2000s, but one particular gender that hasn't been too much covered or properly represented is transgender people. Here's an example.
And Kyle, we want to make your dreams come true. And so here is your hero, Caitlyn Jenner. I just want to say thank you, Kyle, for your beautiful words of support.
Oftentimes, when a transgender character is included, it's more for a joke about the transition itself, and not just for the character. Now, for the majority, this trains them to look at the transition itself, instead of recognize that they are their own character. This is the one dimension. The entire character is just the transition, as Sut Jhally said himself. God bless. Kathleen Clark, who has a Bachelor of Art in Sociology, wrote in Transgender Representations in TV and Movies that this representation can deter some of transgender persons from publicly identifying as transgender for fear of being bullied and or abused. This tells them that if they publicly identify, they will be bullied and that they will be rejected by people in their community and potentially by their families. So Sut's analysis is correct that it impacts the majority's perception on the minorities and transgender and transitioned people, but it's important to know that this also impacts the people who have transitioned and how they look to themselves, and how people who want to transition, look at themselves. They might say, "Oh, okay, I'm just a joke. Like, this is the way that I've been portrayed in the cartoon. This is the way people seem to perceive me. That must be the truth." And in return, people who have transitioned might feel worse about themselves, and people who want to transition might not, in fear of being bullied or misperceived, also feeling like they are the joke. Number 3, class.
That's gonna make you big and strong. Burping time! Oh, smells like someone needs to be changed. When was the last time you were changed? 7 days ago? That's 1 week. There are 7 days in a week. I love you, filthy hobo.
Now, the last statement pretty much describes this feeling of filthy, and it describes it well, the perception that we've put on homeless people in the past in media, is that they're filthy, they can't do anything for themselves, they're helpless, and we need to basically work for them, and they don't do anything in return. They're not on our level. So that's how we interpret them back in the real world. It's affected the majority's group again as seeing the minority groups differently. Now, there are actual scientific studies that show that people in poverty are portrayed as villains, beggars, helpless, and immoral loners. Now, Speak and Tipple actually found that from an effect of this from all the media, there's also that the philanthropic agencies who help to try these people are misrepresenting those in need. Basically, in order to garner hope, they make them seem hopeless and helpless so that other people might join in and help contribute. These agencies do this rather than empowering them into improving their self-image and recognizing their contribution to society. And this is really detrimental to the people in need and the homeless, because they'll start feeling helpless and hopeless, and they really can't do much for themselves. So basically, for everyone, the majority and the minority, it's created this perception that they're helpless and that they can't really do anything for themselves. In that same paper, they found that this misrepresentation in the media and the shelters is actually how they're stuck feeling like that and stuck like they can't be anybody else. Now, overall, Sut Jhally is right. The one-dimensional representations in media do cause majority populations to misperceive the minorities. But as we saw, this also has some pretty negative effects towards the minority populations themselves and the way that they perceive themselves. So that's going to wrap it up for today. Please make sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and make sure to share this video with your great aunt. Bye.